My siblings banned me from their weddings, so I left them out of mine. What happened next left them stunned. My name is Julie Wilson, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the invisible one. The youngest of 5 siblings in a family that never quite made room for me at their table. They had their lives, their inside jokes, their shared memories, while I stood on the outside, watching through the window of their world. Today, as I sit here in my Denver apartment, adjusting my grandmother's pearl necklace and preparing for my own wedding, I can't help but think about how it all began. 4 weddings. For times I was told I didn't belong. For silent reminders that love isn't guaranteed, even when you share the same blood. Growing up in suburban Chicago, I thought family meant unconditional love. I believed that if you tried hard enough, stayed quiet enough, proved yourself worthy enough, you'd eventually earn your place at their table. I spent years chasing that acceptance, believing that if I was good, patient, understanding, eventually they would see me. Eventually, they would invite me in. But when each of their weddings came and went without a seat saved for me, something fundamental shifted inside. It wasn't anger at first, it was confusion, then deep sadness, then a hollow acceptance that maybe I was asking for something that was never meant to be mine. When you're the youngest by a significant stretch, you don't just feel small, you feel invisible. My brother Nathan, the oldest, was already applying to Northwestern when I was learning to ride my Schwinn bicycle around our Oak Park neighborhood. My sister Chloe had a serious boyfriend before I could even spell Wisconsin correctly. Brother Luke was practicing for his driver's test, while I was still figuring out how to French braid my hair properly. Even Connor, though closest to me in age, maintained a safe distance, like he had a life too important to slow down for his little sister tagging along behind. I tried in all the innocent ways a child knows how to fit in. I'd sit quietly in the corner of our family room while they laughed about college parties and relationships I couldn't understand. I'd offer to help carry groceries from our Honda Pilot or pass the Doritos during our summer cookouts, hoping maybe they'd smile at me, invite me into their circle, pull me close for once. Most of the time, I got polite nods, quick dismissals, or worse, complete silence, like I was furniture that occasionally moved. The first real crack in my blind devotion came when I was 10 years old. Nathan was getting married to his college sweetheart, Rebecca. I was absolutely thrilled. I spent weeks thinking about the dress I'd wear, the photos we'd take together, the memory we'd all share as a complete family. But instead, one gray October afternoon, Mom and Dad sat me down in our kitchen. I can still hear the overly careful, artificially sweet tone Mom used. "Sweetheart, Nathan and Rebecca are having a child-free wedding. You won't be able to come." I blinked at her, my 10-year-old brain struggling to process the words. Child-free? I wasn't some random stranger's toddler. I was family. I was his sister. The day that changed everything was about to begin, and I had no idea how deep the wound would cut. I told myself Nathan's wedding was just a one-time thing, a misunderstanding that would never happen again. Surely when Chloe got married, things would be different. I was 14 now, practically an adult, or so I thought. I'd grown taller, more mature, better at controlling my emotions. When Chloe announced her engagement to her college boyfriend, Andrew, I felt that familiar flicker of hope rekindling in my chest. This time would be different. This time, I'd be included in the celebration. I stayed extra quiet around them during the planning months, tried to be as helpful and mature as possible. I offered to address invitations, helped Mom research catering options, even volunteered to organize Chloe's jewelry box, anything to prove I deserved a seat at the reception. But then came those dreaded words, "Chloe and Andrew are having an adults-only wedding." "It's not personal, Julie." Not personal. 2 words that felt like a physical slap across my face. How could it not be personal when it was happening again? How could it not be personal when it was me being left behind, again? This time, I didn't cry. I simply nodded, pretending to understand, pretending the rejection didn't cut straight through to my core. I sat through weeks of conversations about bridesmaid dresses and reception venues, excitement buzzing through our Elmhurst house while I remained invisible. On Chloe's wedding day, I stayed home with our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Martinez, just like I had for Nathan's wedding. I spent the evening staring out my bedroom window, watching cars return from the celebration, wondering if anyone had even noticed I was missing from the family photos. 2 weddings. 2 rejections. But I still held on to hope that maybe, just maybe, the pattern would break. By the time Luke got engaged, I was 16, old enough to drive, old enough to have a part-time job at Target, old enough to understand adult conversations. Surely this time would be different. Luke seemed more laid back than Nathan and Chloe, more inclusive. He talked about wanting a big family celebration, not a stuffy formal affair. When he mentioned inviting all our cousins from Milwaukee, my heart soared. This was it, my chance to finally be part of a family wedding. But then our aunts and uncles started chiming in, their voices dripping with judgment during Sunday family dinners. It's so refreshing to have weddings without children running wild. Kids just make everything so chaotic and unpredictable. And just like that, Luke folded under the family pressure. No one under 18 allowed. I was still 6 months short of the arbitrary cut line. I was devastated. So close to inclusion, yet still not enough. I went to Luke directly, my heart pounding, voice shaking, and asked if he'd consider making an exception. "I'm your sister," I whispered, standing in the doorway of his bedroom. "Please." Luke looked uncomfortable but remained firm. "If I make an exception for you, I'll have to make exceptions for everyone," he said, not meeting my eyes. That's when I completely lost it. Years of accumulated hurt and longing poured out all at once. I yelled for the first time in my life, telling him how unfair it was, how I wasn't just everyone, how I was his sister who loved him and just wanted to celebrate his happiness. Instead of listening, instead of seeing my pain, my parents grounded me for 3 months. 3 months for speaking up, for daring to ask to be seen and valued. But the worst was yet to come, and Connor's wedding would be the final nail in the coffin of my childhood hope. When Connor, the youngest of my older siblings, got engaged 2 years later, I was 18. Finally legal, finally an adult by every measure that had previously excluded me. I thought surely this time, the arbitrary age barriers that had kept me away would crumble. But I'd learned to protect my heart by then. I didn't ask about the wedding. I didn't volunteer to help with planning. I waited, hoping someone would mention my invitation, but dreading the conversation I knew was coming. And sure enough, another adults-only wedding, but this time with a cruel twist that shattered what remained of my faith in family fairness. My cousin Emma, who had just turned 19, received her invitation without question. She was barely 8 months older than me, but in my family's eyes, that made all the difference in the world. The casualness of my exclusion hurt more than the exclusion itself. It had become normal, expected. No one thought to ask if it hurt. No one considered that it might matter to me. I had become the family afterthought, the one person whose feelings were consistently overlooked. I sent Connor a polite text on his wedding day, "Congratulations. Wishing you and Amanda all the best." Then I turned off my phone and spent the evening alone in my bedroom, the silence somehow louder than any celebration could have been. 4 weddings. 4 rejections. 4 clear messages that I wasn't truly part of this family, no matter how much I loved them or tried to belong. That night, staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom, I made a decision that would change everything. When I turned 18, I was leaving Chicago. I was going to college somewhere far enough away that family gatherings became optional, not mandatory. I was going to build a life where my presence mattered, where I wasn't just tolerated but genuinely wanted. I applied to the University of Colorado Boulder, got accepted with a partial scholarship, and never looked back. For the first time in my life, I was choosing myself over the family that had consistently chosen everyone else. But I had no idea that years later, when love finally found me, the tables would turn completely. The family that had excluded me would desperately want to be included in my happiness, and for once, I would hold all the power to say yes or no. The real story was just beginning, and the wedding invitation that would change everything was still years away from being written. College in Boulder felt like stepping into a completely different universe. For the first time in my life, I wasn't defined by being someone's little sister or the family afterthought. I was just Julie Wilson, a marketing major from Chicago who loved hiking, made killer chocolate chip cookies, and had a contagious laugh. I threw myself into everything, my communications classes, my part-time job at a local coffee shop called Mountain Roasters, and friendships that felt genuine and uncomplicated. My roommate, Ashley from Portland, became the sister I'd always wanted, someone who included me in plans, remembered my favorite things, and never made me feel like I was asking for too much by simply existing. For years, I kept my family history to myself. When new friends asked about my siblings, I'd just smile and say, "Oh, we're close in that distant kind of way." It was easier than explaining that I was close to them the way you're close to a beautiful painting in a museum. You can admire it from afar, but you're not allowed to touch. It was during my junior year, working at a marketing internship in downtown Denver, that I met David Chun. David wasn't flashy or overwhelming like my siblings had always seemed to me. He was steady, thoughtful, real. He drove a reliable Toyota Camry, brought homemade sandwiches to work, and had the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. I remember the night everything changed between us. We were sitting on the worn leather couch in his apartment, sharing Chinese takeout and watching old episodes of The Office, when I found myself telling him about the weddings. I tried to laugh it off, tried to make it sound smaller than it was, like it was just some quirky family tradition. But David didn't laugh. He didn't brush it aside or tell me I was being too sensitive. He set down his lo mein, looked me directly in the eyes, and said, "Julie, that's not normal. That's not okay. Families don't exclude their own children from major celebrations, not real families." It was the first time someone had said it out loud. The first time someone hadn't made excuses for my siblings or told me to just let it go and be the bigger person. David helped me see something I'd spent my entire life avoiding. It wasn't that I was too needy or too demanding. It was that I'd been conditioned to expect crumbs and call it a feast. Being loved by David, fully, freely, without conditions or expiration dates, opened my eyes to everything I'd been missing. His family embraced me immediately. His mom, Linda, insisted I call her by her first name and always made sure there was an extra place set at their dinner table. His dad, Robert, taught me how to change my car's oil and never once made me feel stupid for not knowing. With David, I stopped chasing people who made me feel invisible. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I stopped believing that being born into a family meant I was obligated to accept being hurt by them repeatedly. When David proposed to me on a hiking trail overlooking the Rocky Mountains, the rings sparkling in the Colorado sunshine, I felt a peace I'd never experienced. This time, it was going to be different. This time, every choice would be mine. But I had no idea that planning our wedding would force me to confront the family that had shaped me, and that my guest list would become the most powerful statement I'd ever made. When David and I started planning our wedding, everything felt light and joyful. We chose a small venue in the mountains outside Boulder, a rustic lodge with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked snow-capped peaks. We planned a celebration that reflected us: casual elegance, local Colorado beer, and a playlist that included everything from classic rock to indie folk. As we worked on the guest list together, sitting at my kitchen table with cups of coffee and a yellow legal pad, I felt an unexpected calm settle over me. I knew exactly what kind of day I wanted. I knew exactly who deserved to be there. The people who had stood by me. The people who made me feel loved without requiring me to earn it. The people who saw me not as a burden or an afterthought, but as someone genuinely worth celebrating. That list didn't include Nathan, Chloe, Luke, or Connor. It wasn't a decision made in anger or spite. It was clarity, the kind that comes when you finally stop trying to force puzzle pieces that were never meant to fit together. I realized my wedding should be about love, not obligation. About building something beautiful and new, not clinging to the damaged remains of old hurts. I didn't make any grand announcements. I didn't send dramatic letters or post cryptic messages on Facebook. I simply left their names off the invitation list, quietly and firmly. David supported my decision completely. "Your wedding day should be filled with people who love you unconditionally," he said, squeezing my hand. "Not people who've spent years making you feel like you don't matter." For the first time in my life, I chose myself without asking for permission first. I knew it would cause ripples, maybe even a tsunami. Families like mine don't like being excluded, even when they've spent decades excluding others. But their reactions weren't my responsibility anymore. My wedding was going to be filled with warmth, laughter, and genuine affection, not resentment disguised as obligation, not old wounds dressed up in formal wear. The first crack in their facade came 6 weeks before the wedding. Mom called on a Thursday afternoon, her voice artificially bright in that particular way that meant she was dancing around something explosive. "Julie, sweetheart," she said, "how are the wedding plans coming along?" "Good," I replied carefully. "Almost everything's finalized." "Wonderful. Your siblings mentioned they haven't received their invitations yet. Did the post office lose them?" My heart tightened, but my voice stayed steady. "No, Mom. They're not invited." The silence that followed was deafening. Then came the explosion I'd been expecting for 28 years. "What do you mean they're not invited?" Mom's voice cracked with shock and fury. "They're your family, Julie." They didn't invite me to their weddings, I said simply. I'm just returning the same energy they gave me. And that's when everything I'd been holding back for decades finally came pouring out. That was completely different. Mom snapped, her voice sharp with outrage. You were a child then, Julie. You couldn't possibly understand. I understood perfectly, I interrupted, my voice growing stronger with each word. I understood that my own siblings didn't want me at the most important days of their lives. I understood that I wasn't worth making an exception for, even when I begged. The guilt trip came fast and predictable, like it always did. She accused me of being vindictive, of tearing the family apart, of embarrassing them in front of the entire extended family. And there it was, the real fear beneath her anger. What would people think? What would the neighbors say? How would she explain this to her church friends? I'm not trying to hurt anyone, I said, my voice calm but firm. I'm simply choosing to surround myself with people who've always chosen to include me. After I ended that call, the family group chat exploded like a social media wildfire. Rebecca, Nathan's wife, was first to post, all fake sweetness, "Hey Julie. Something must have happened with the mail. None of us received our wedding invitations yet." Then Luke chimed in, blunt and irritated, "What's this about us not being invited? Someone explain what's happening." I stared at my phone screen, watching the messages pile up, feeling that familiar old ache pulling at my chest. Part of me wanted to explain everything, to lay out the 28 years of being forgotten, dismissed, and excluded. But I knew it wouldn't matter. They'd never listened before, they weren't going to start now. So I did something revolutionary, I said nothing. I left the messages on read. I refused to be dragged into a conversation where my pain had always been minimized and my feelings had always been treated like inconvenient obstacles to their comfort. The next few days brought an avalanche of backlash. Rebecca posted passive-aggressive Facebook statuses, "Family is forever, even when some people choose to forget." Chloe texted me directly, calling me selfish and immature. Luke accused me of being dramatic and holding grudges. Connor said I needed professional help to get over childhood issues. Their words bounced off me more easily than I'd expected. Maybe because David's voice was still echoing in my ear, "You don't owe them anything, Julie. You owe yourself peace." A few days later, my parents showed up at my Denver apartment unannounced. I opened the door to find Mom's tear-streaked face and Dad's cold disappointment, expressions I remembered well from my childhood. "What are you thinking, Julie?" Mom demanded before I could even speak. "Not inviting your own siblings to your wedding? What kind of person does that make you?" I stood there feeling strangely calm, like I was watching this confrontation from outside my own body. "The kind of person," I said quietly, "who finally stopped begging to be included by people who never wanted to include her in the first place." They argued, pleaded, and guilt-tripped for over an hour, but nothing changed. For the first time in my life, I wasn't backing down. I wasn't explaining myself away or trying to earn their approval. I'd already chosen peace, and I wasn't going to trade it back for a seat at a table where I'd never truly been welcome. But I had no idea that their desperation was just getting started, and the lengths they'd go to try to change my mind would shock even me. The morning of my wedding arrived not with anxiety, but with the most profound sense of peace I'd ever experienced. I woke up in the mountain lodge where David and I were staying, sunlight streaming through the windows, and felt lighter than I had in years. There was no knot of worry in my stomach, no anxious wondering about who might show up out of obligation or who might cause drama. Everyone coming today was someone who had actively chosen to love me, friends who'd become family, mentors who believed in me, cousins who'd always seen my worth even when my siblings couldn't. As I got ready, my chosen family surrounded me with love. Ashley, my college roommate and maid of honor, helped me into my dress, a simple but elegant gown I'd found at a boutique in Boulder. David's sister Emma did my makeup, chatting and laughing while she worked. My friend Maria from work arranged my hair, weaving in small white flowers that perfectly matched the mountain wildflowers in my bouquet. Not one person there made me feel small or forgotten. Not one person had ever made me earn their affection like it was a prize I might not deserve. The ceremony was everything I'd dreamed of and more. The small mountain chapel was filled with warm golden sunlight. David stood at the altar looking like he'd been waiting his whole life to see me walk toward him, and every face I passed as I walked down the aisle was someone who'd stood by me when it mattered most. When David took my hands in his, I saw that quiet promise in his eyes. This would be different. This was a beginning built on mutual respect, genuine partnership, and the kind of love that doesn't require you to shrink yourself to fit into someone else's world. The reception was filled with the kind of laughter that bubbles up from deep within and spills out because it has nowhere else to go. We danced until our feet hurt, sang off-key to classic rock songs, clinked glasses over Colorado craft beer, and shared stories that made our cheeks hurt from smiling. At some point during the evening, I caught myself looking around the room, taking it all in. The joy, the freedom, the unmistakable feeling of belonging somewhere. It struck me then, this wasn't about who was missing. It wasn't about the empty chairs or the family members who'd chosen their pride over love. It was about the people who stayed. The people who showed up without being begged, without needing to be convinced that I was worth their time and presence. 3 months after the wedding, I received a group text from Nathan. "We've all been talking, and we think we were wrong about the wedding situation. We'd like to sit down and talk." I read the message while sitting on my couch with David, both of us sharing a bowl of popcorn and watching a movie. For a moment, I felt that old flutter of hope. Maybe they finally understood, maybe things could be different. But then I realized something that changed everything. I didn't need their apology anymore. I'd already built a life filled with people who'd never made me feel invisible in the first place. I showed the text to David, who squeezed my hand and smiled. "What do you want to do?" "Nothing," I said, and meant it. "I'm exactly where I belong." Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is walking away from people who only love you when it's convenient. Family isn't just about bloodlines or shared last names. It's about who shows up, who stays when you're not easy to love, who chooses you day after day without needing to be convinced of your worth. If you're listening to this story and you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hear me, you're not broken. You're not wrong for wanting more. Sometimes choosing yourself means leaving behind the people who taught you to doubt your worth, and that's not cruelty, it's survival. It's the beginning of everything beautiful that's waiting for you on the other side of that choice.